Just before the 1994 election, the ANC asked me to come on board, to get involved in the election campaign and to be a candidate for Parliament. The early years of the democracy, it's important to say, were unique, I think, in world politics. The national interest was more important than the party interest. The national interest was more important than any person's interests in political power or material gain. At that point, a new government, effectively a new country, I think we were prepared to sacrifice anything. And the biggest challenge that we faced was obviously the AIDS pandemic. And we, as the African National Congress, had decided and written that we would reduce defense spending, which was very high under apartheid, because it was a police state. I was elected in 1994. So I moved to Cape Town into the National Parliament as a Member of Parliament, where my responsibility was primarily as the ranking ANC member on the main Financial Oversight Committee, a committee called the Public Accounts Committee. Through this committee, I discovered that as Mandela was about to step down from public life, so late 1998, early 1999, his successor, Thabo Mbeki, made the decision to spend what will ultimately amount to around $10 billion on highly sophisticated weaponry. We put out a tender for a new jet fighter trainer. 9 countries responded. 2 of those countries were shortlisted. This did not include a bid that was jointly held by BAE Systems, the British company, and Saab, the Swedish weapons manufacturer. And their governments, through Tony Blair, their Prime Minister, and the Swedish Prime Minister at the time, had made numerous visits to South Africa to persuade the key cabinet ministers who were on the committee that would decide what we would buy and from whom, that BAE and Saab's option was the way to go. When the Minister of Defense, Joe Modise, saw the shortlist, he was extremely angry. The reason that BAE Saab had not made the shortlist was they did not meet a whole lot of the technical criteria, and the option that they presented was 2.5 times more expensive than the plane that the South African Air Force actually wanted. So he insisted that a new shortlist be drawn up that included BAE Saab. They were last on a shortlist of 3. So in order to ensure they won this contract, on this, the single biggest contract that the democratic South Africa has ever signed, the Minister of Defense, 2/3 of the way through the purchasing process, decided to exclude cost as a procurement criteria. But the primary reason for those deals was that around $300 million in bribes were paid to senior politicians, including the defense minister at the time, his political advisor, the head of procurement or purchasing in the South African Defence Force, a number of other senior defense officials, and sadly to the African National Congress, the ANC, my own party. And at that point I realized that my political career was effectively over if I was going to pursue this investigation at all. So I had a terrible Christmas and New Year thinking about this all the time, and then we go back into Parliament, and almost immediately I'm asked by my party to make a statement to the press that effectively says there's nothing to investigate. A statement written by the Speaker of Parliament, the person who is supposed to be independent. And all of my colleagues on my committee from the ANC are saying, well, you've got to say the statement. So I go before the press and I read out the statement that's been given to me. And as I'm reading it out, I just know that I'm doing something that I can't live with. And after the press conference, I walked out and I had to travel about 20 minutes to meet the opposition member of parliament who chaired this public accounts committee. So I arrive at this place where I'm meeting the chairman of the committee, Gavin Woods, and he's sitting next to a little stream on a chair, and he looks up at me as I walk towards him and he says, "I heard your press conference, so it's all over." In other words, he thought I was giving up the investigation. And he was in tears, a man older than me. And I looked at him and I said, "No, it's not." We announced that we were going to continue the investigation. I announced for the first time about the pressure I had received from the party to stop the investigation, and that effectively sealed my political fate. And it was a matter of making a choice between my loyalty to the party, and this is a remarkable political party. This is the party of Nelson Mandela. A choice between that party and between my loyalty to the country as I saw it, to the Constitution, to my constitutional role when I was sworn in as a member of Parliament to hold our political leaders to account. And it really was for me the point at which the ANC lost its moral compass, the point at which we were prepared to say we will spend what were quite scarce public resources on this weaponry that we didn't need, rather than provide life-saving medication to our own citizens. That senior members of the African National Congress, the party of Nelson Mandela, were prepared to undermine the institutions of our democracy that they had spent decades fighting for. Of the trainer jets that we bought from BAE, 11 of 24 have ever been used. But hundreds of thousands of South Africans have died because they were too poor to buy the drugs that could keep them alive. The drugs that, if we hadn't had the arms deal, their own government should have been buying for them.